Barry Copinger, very good morning, sir.
Good morning, Clive.
Now, of course, we are talking slavery this morning. Slavery, now I would have thought, you'd think about African countries, slavery, but not the UK, but it's quite prevalent, isn't it, in the UK in society?
Indeed, I think it's a subject which is growing in its prominence and growing in its awareness, I suppose. I mean, I think what we're talking about in terms of slavery is also about organised criminality, because a lot of this is organised criminals who are coercing people or are luring people from other countries perhaps to come over here with the promise of a better life, of a better world, of all sorts of opportunities. And when sometimes people get over here, quite often they're being coerced into criminal activity of one form or another. So it's basically organised criminals exploiting vulnerable people.
That's right, because I've just been looking at some case notes that Paul has put together for me. And looking down, the thing that really comes out loud on these case notes that I have is the fact that the crime isn't reported enough.
Absolutely. I think it's a subject which is very much below the radar, to use a well-known phrase. I think there's a lot of it probably going on within the region and across the country. And you're right, there's not sufficient reporting, and one of the things that I'm keen to do and have been doing over the last year or two is work to raise awareness of the signs and symptoms of this activity, to spread awareness amongst professionals and amongst others who work across the community to look for the signs, and also, more importantly, to try to develop networks so that we start to tackle this issue in terms of spotting it, highlighting it, reporting it where it needs to be reported, and that there be a proper response from law enforcement to deal with it.
Do you think that the reason it's not reported is because the person who is being a victim of this horrendous crime, slavery, can't report it themselves?
Yeah, the most powerless people in all of this are the victims themselves, and they are victims. They're being promised things will be much better in another country, and that there's a brave new world there for them, and then when they get over here they find out that it's almost as bad, if not worse. They're being held against their will sometimes, they're being coerced into doing things they might not want to do, whether that's benefit fraud, whether it's prostitution, whether it's cultivating illegal drugs, or a kind of domestic activity, exploited to do very low paid, or in some occasions no pay whatsoever, to do work at that level as well. So there's a wide range of different activities that you would call slavery, but all has two common links. One is a victim, a very vulnerable victim, and one is a perpetrator who's basically a criminal.
And of course, do you think, because human trafficking is very big in the news at the moment, do you think that contributes to the crime?
Well, it is criminal activity, and it is crime of one form or another. If we looked at something like benefit fraud, for instance, that clearly is a crime. If we looked at prostitution, that's viewed as a crime in some people's eyes. I think if we looked at the sort of domestic servitude, or some of the people who are working in some of the service industries, we might be talking about businesses who are exploiting their workers, and of course businesses who are putting at risk legitimate businesses who are trading reputably and honestly and paying their workers a decent wage. This is a different kind of activity, and we need to highlight it.
So how common is slavery on Teesside?
It's an issue that we are taking a growing interest in, and which we are receiving more and more information about. Crimes are reported to Cleveland, and the police will investigate them, and working with the CPS will bring cases before the courts. But I would say it's something which is a growing area of activity. I think here and across the region there's a growing awareness of it, and there's a growing need to do something about it, and that work is going on. But I suspect it will be some time before some of that work comes to fruition.
Do you think that cases that are reported are successfully prosecuted now more than ever?
Well, in this part of the world there are cases that are going through process, so obviously I wouldn't want to talk about those, but But generally, I think as awareness is raised around the characteristics of slavery, and as people start to think more about the consequences of that slavery, you know, we're talking about people being trafficked, we're talking about sexual exploitation, we're talking about child labour, forced marriage, the forced recruitment of children into all sorts of activity. This is pretty serious stuff, and it's quite right that the United Nations has taken an international stance on it, because it's something, if we want to create a better world, this is the kind of stuff that we need to be addressing.
Now, the question I'd like to raise is, what's the first point of contact for a person who knows that slavery is going on and they need to report it? What's the first point of contact in that case?
Well, I would suggest the obvious point of contact is the police, and I would encourage anybody who feels that there's exploitation going on, or is witnessing exploitation going on, to contact the police. But there are other organisations and agencies out there in the community who, if people don't feel confident about coming forward to the police, they can speak to. In fact, most community organisations these days have an awareness of slavery, and we are working with them. So my advice would be to anyone who feels they're being exploited to talk to any of the advice agencies, any of the support agencies that are out there. We have good links with all of them, and one way or another we will get those issues pursued.
Do you think, especially in the Teesside area, that there is enough support for people to go forward and report these crimes, that there is enough support there, like a framework, so to speak?
There is support for victims of crime in the Cleveland area. There's growing support. I've set up a website. If you go onto my website as the Cleveland Police and Crime Commissioner, there are links to the Cleveland Victim Services website. There are over 30 organisations on there who can help various types of victims of crime, and it's something I'm very interested in doing. And from April next year, I'm responsible for commissioning victim services across the Cleveland area, and we're doing a lot of work at the moment with different organisations in the Cleveland area, both to develop the sort of specifications that we want to see, and that's been done in consultation with victims and victims organisations, but also in making sure that we've got a range of services that can best support victims. So work is going on. I would encourage people to speak to any voluntary or community organisation that they have contact with or feel comfortable speaking to, and one way or another we'll get those issues taken up. Because
this is a crime which literally can happen next door to you, and you don't know about it.
Absolutely. I mean, you see from time to time, occasionally well publicised raids where police raid domestic properties and find out there are cannabis factories going on in those properties, often to the surprise of other residents living in the street. I've been out myself with the police on some of those raids, and it's quite often people, sometimes people in the immediate vicinity have got suspicions, but people perhaps further down the street will have no idea what's going on. So we do ask people to be vigilant, obviously, and if they have concerns to report them to the police.
Now, of course, the government actually spearheaded a campaign a couple of months ago to bring out the awareness of slavery that is happening not only in the North East but in the UK on a whole. Do you think the government's going on the right line? Do you think the campaign has worked so far?
The government has appointed an independent anti-slavery commissioner who's called Kevin Highland, who's an ex-senior Metropolitan Police officer who I've met on several occasions, and Kevin is doing a lot of work, not just in this country but globally as well. He's doing a lot of travelling around and working with organisations worldwide. He's putting in a lot of effort. It is early days, but he's working closely with police forces and police and crime commissioners. He's working a lot with various voluntary organisations at a national level. He's working with the National Crime Agency, who have responsibility for tackling organised crime nationally and internationally. So he's making all of those links, and I think as we develop our networks and as that awareness is raised, and as we have some success in tackling trafficking in slavery, which we will do, and I think that will be well publicised. I think as time passes, awareness will raise, work will be done, which will be better joined up, and we will get results. But at the end of the day, we do rely on the public to be vigilant and to report any concerns that they've got.
Well, that's right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about raising the awareness, finding out information as well about this horrific crime. And, of course, social media, of course, is very, very prevalent now. Do you think social media are helping with fighting this?
Well, social media is an easy means of communication, isn't it? And you know, it's very prevalent in society today, and we get a lot of information reported to my office through social media. Again, I would just draw your attention to my Victim Services website and the information that's there, and you can access. And there's a lot of information available on the internet. The Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner has got his own plan, and I've got a copy of it with me today, and Kevin Highland can be contacted directly, and he's got his own website, and I'm sure if you Google him you'll be able to get the information. But he's got a strategic plan which is out there, and which we're all working to, and hopefully that will make a difference. But I would encourage people to report.
Right. OK, let's go to the questions now. CliveHort@gmail.com has been heavily involved in this as well. So the first question I'll ask is, how does modern slavery occur?
How does modern slavery occur? Modern slavery occurs through the exploitation of vulnerable individuals by organised criminals, and it occurs on an international basis, and it involves the trafficking of people, often across boundaries, across countries, and it is something which is widespread across Europe and across the world, and we need to tackle it.
Right. And, of course, how much of a problem is it in our community today?
It is a problem. It is a problem which we are developing our awareness of, which I think communities are developing their awareness of, and organisations are developing their awareness of, and we need to work together to tackle. But there is a willingness to do so, and I think we have good links and networks. So we are at the early stages probably of this work, but it will gather momentum, and your listeners can play a part in that.
Right, OK, we're talking to Barry Copinger, Police Crimes Commissioner. We're talking slavery. You can join in as well on 01642 645 827. We'll be back after this. That just went off my mind there.
Slave to the rhythm.
Slavery, that's what we're talking about this morning on Ignition Radio. OK, we go to CliveHort@gmail.com. The next question, where do the victims come from?
Well, victims come from worldwide, really. I think we could see victims of trafficking and slavery come from across the world, but also not just across the world. I mean, we could see people locally who are being exploited as well. So I think we could say that this is a category of crime which is very broad-based. It could involve people being trafficked across the world. It could be people being trafficked within the northeast. It has unlimited scope.
Yeah, of course, slavery doesn't discriminate, does it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, what are the signs that someone is being abused?
The sorts of signs that you would look for from human trafficking victims could be signs of self-harm, could be people with untreated or neglected injuries. There could be people who whose welfare is not being thought about. They could be in poor physical condition. They could be suffering anxiety, hesitation, confusion. They could be very passive, very obedient, not used to making decisions, not being very assertive. And I think perhaps most obviously there would be people who didn't have any identity documents or a mobile phone, or who would have trouble in communicating without some sort of a controlling person present. So I think that might give you a picture of the sort of vulnerable, exploited, damaged individuals that we're talking about.
Yes, because that's what slavery does to people, doesn't it? It takes away their own self-independence, their self-esteem. And, of course, in the worst-case scenarios, people who are suffering slavery can actually take their own lives.
I would imagine that is the case. That is the case. They may well come to the conclusion that life's not worth living, which is a terrible situation when you think of how they've been lured into this in the first place. They may well have been living in difficult conditions in their country of origin, and they've been promised a better world exists for them. And of course they travel that distance and they find it could, in some cases, could be even worse. So it's the most sickening exploitation of vulnerable people, I think.
And of course, when you say about conditions that people come over to, sometimes the conditions are worse when they come over to the UK than whichever country they left from.
Indeed. I mean, we're talking about people who are imprisoned in all aspects, you know, as well as the sort of mental and physical coercion that exists. We could literally have people who are imprisoned. So in the cannabis farm situation, we could end up with people who are being locked inside premises to cultivate cannabis. And the only time the door is open, they might be given some food, or, you know, or they're allowed some time to sleep, literally to keep them alive, so that they can be exploited. It's absolutely sickening.
Because the conditions from the perpetrator, the person who tries to control the person, are so basic. Very basic. Right, we go to the questions. CliveHort@gmail.com, of course. Is there a difference between human trafficking and slavery itself?
Well, one follows the other, because what happens is people are trafficked and then enslaved. So I think you've got to look at the two together. The trafficking of individuals is going on across the world. The enslaving of them usually takes place when they get to their end destination. Yeah.
And finally, what can we do to help victims of modern slavery?
What we can do to help victims of modern slavery, because as we've indicated, they're often in such a difficult position that they're unable to help themselves. What we can do is keep vigilant, keep our eyes and ears open. If we see circumstances where we think someone is in a coercive or an exploited situation, or are exhibiting some of the symptoms which I've just described about their physical condition and their general demeanour, I think the onus is on us to make sure that someone who can do something about that is made aware. Now, that the obvious route is to contact the police, but equally there are a whole range of organisations in the community who would be able to share that information indirectly with the police, or would be able to support that victim through the process which needs to take place. So I would ask people to think about that and think about what the best route might be for them. It may not be a direct representation to the police. It may well be a word with somebody who they know who's active in the community, some organisation locally. But I would urge people, if they see a problem, if they think something needs to be addressed, please do something about it, because somebody out there could be relying on you.
Now, we live in an age of CCTV, of course, neighbourhood watch schemes as well. Do you think that the reason this crime isn't reported as readily as it should be is because people are afraid to report it?
I would hope that's not the case, but it could be a possibility. And if that is the case, if people are uneasy or unsure about that, then they should not use the police as a direct point of reference. They should talk to somebody who they feel could assist them. It could be at a local level, it could be the local councillor with the local MP, it could be one of the victims or one of the various support organisations that exist in the community to help people who are vulnerable. It could be a citizens advice centre, it could be victim support or all the victim support-related organisations. It could be any organisation in the community which is working for the community. As I say, we've got good links and we share information, so please speak to somebody.
That's it. At the end of the day, if you are a victim or you know a victim of slavery, then please, please, please come forward. Don't hold back and come forward with information which you could actually help save somebody's life. Simple as. Right, now, websites, telephone numbers, do you have?
My website is, if you Google Police and Crime Commissioner for Cleveland, you will find me. At police, obviously a 101 for most police calls, and I would encourage you to either ring the police or contact my office, or contact your local councillor, contact anyone who you come into contact with who serves the community. It could be your local housing association, could be local welfare services of one form or another, or victim support organisation. Please speak to someone.
At the end of the day, don't be backward in coming forward. If you know this crime is going on, even if it's in your street or in the borough, please report it. It's as simple as that. Barry, thank you ever so much for coming into Ignition Radio this morning.
Thank you, Clive, and thanks for listening.
Lovely, lovely.